Hey, hello, friends. Thanks for tuning in this week. We got a great show for you. As always, before I introduce the guest, let me run a few things by you. First, please follow, subscribe, rate, and review the show. It helps boost the podcast, take it up in the rankings, get it more exposure, and that helps the podcast because I can get the best guests out there for you. Additionally, please go follow me on social media, ROYBTZ on Instagram, ROY_BNTZ on Twitter. On Twitter, you can subscribe. If you go to my profile, you'll see at the top of the page, there's a button, a review kind of bar where you can subscribe to the newsletter. It gives you access to updates, blog posts, news about guests and the future of the show. And most importantly, just an easy way to get the podcast to your email every single week. Finally, please consider supporting this independent podcast. I made the decision not to work with any sponsors, any other companies. Don't personally like when I listen to a podcast and there is a ad in the middle of it. And I'm assuming you listeners don't like it as well. And I just decided that I'm not going to do that. So if you can please support the podcast, you can go to Anchor, you can go to Patreon, and we'll keep this independent, organic, and keep growing. Finally, if you want to start your own podcast, I do have a course that is out right now. Full tutorial, covers everything you need to know, soup to nuts, A to Z, 1 to 100, whatever metric you want to use. It's got everything you need to grow, execute, market, reach out to guests, the advantages, the benefits of starting a podcast. So everything you need to know about podcasts. And I will link it in the show notes. It is on Gumroad, so feel free to check it out. All right, let's move on to the guests. This week I have Arturo Elizondo. Arturo is the founder and CEO of a biotech food company called The Every Company. And essentially what they do is they offer an alternative to eggs. They produce protein through this yeast fermentation process they've developed and perfected over time, and they sell that to other big companies who can put that into different foods that we eat, and it's just a better egg alternative, more environmentally friendly, definitely more ethical. So they've been doing this for a long time, and I actually learned on this podcast that they are one of the early companies in the space, which I had no idea because you only hear about companies when there's some sort of a breakthrough or they raise a lot of capital. So that's when the news media tends to pick up the scoop or tell you about this overnight success. But the reality is a lot of these companies have been grinding for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of work. And that's the portion and the part that kind of is left untold and unsaid. So we dive deep into that. Arturo gives his story, his journey, what it took for him to become an entrepreneur and build the company. So make sure to listen. That's in the second part of the podcast. Make sure to listen to that because there's a lot of great insight. And in the first half of the podcast, we talk and cover more about the inefficiencies of animals as a food product and why it's so bad for us, the planet, etc. Make sure you listen to that. It's packed with information, honestly. The whole podcast is packed with information. It's a great one. I'm not going to keep you waiting. Let's jump right into it. And let me introduce this week's guest. So without further ado, here is Arturo Elizondo. Enjoy the episode, everyone.
The Genuinely Interested Podcast.
Arturo, how you doing, man?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for joining the podcast. It's I can't wait to get into a few things today.
Yeah, I'm really excited. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man. So for people who may not know who you are, maybe you can give us a little bit of your backstory.
Sure. I am Arturo, founder and CEO of The Every Company. We make eggs without using chickens and really focusing on helping transition the world to an animal-free future, away from factory farms and into more sustainable forms of production. My background is mainly in government and public policy. I grew up in Texas, spent some time in DC thinking that that's where I was going to make my mark and go into public service to make a difference. And I realized how incredibly difficult it felt. It felt to me to be able to do so. And in parallel, fell in love with, more so, not necessarily fell in love, but realized the magnitude of the problems we have in our food system, and realized, really made a decision early in life to say, if there's one problem that I can dedicate my entire life to solving or helping solve, it was going to be food.
Mm-hmm. And why specifically eggs?
Well,
because there's a lot of companies, right? There's like, I feel like there's a lot of growth happening right now in alternative food markets. You have companies like Impossible and Beyond and Gardein and many others that are replacing meat with plants and are doing a great job. They don't taste obviously exactly like meat, although Impossible is pretty close, to be fair. Impossible, I remember the first time I had it in back in New York in David Chang's restaurant. I forget the name. My jaw dropped. I couldn't believe how close it was to like a Burger King burger or McDonald's burger. And then you have companies like Memphis Meats, Eclipse, and others, right? And they're doing more lab-grown stuff, meats, milk, etc. But you guys are doing something a little bit different, right?
Correct.
So can you expand on what you guys are doing?
Sure. And ultimately, I'll start with why we chose eggs.
Okay.
And, I'm Mexican by heritage, and I grew up in Texas, and animal protein was a huge part of my life. When I decided to transition to a more plant-based diet, I can't tell you the number of times I went to a grocery store and then looked at the back of the ingredient statement of a product, and it had eggs.
Yeah.
They are in everything. It's not just the center of the plate, but they're this insidious ingredient that has made its way into almost all kinds of foods. It's so hard to find products that don't have them. And that's in large part because eggs are not only a tasty product, but they're a functional ingredient. They foam and bind and gel in ways that very few things can. And so it's almost impossible to bake a cake or a souffle or meringues, or make for the gelation properties for scrambles and frittatas without an egg. And that's why that was one of the reasons why I wanted us to focus on that product. And then also too, it's ubiquitous not only in terms of their uses, but in terms of consumption globally. Like it's probably one of the most, if not the most, commonly eaten animal proteins on the planet, right? Across cultures.
Yeah.
And we thought, well, if we can, and over 1 trillion eggs are consumed every single year.
Trillion. What is that worldwide or in the US?
In worldwide.
Worldwide.
The US, I think it's, I think it may be closer to like 80 billion. Wow. So it's still, I mean, on average, the average consumer, the average American consumes around an egg a day, maybe just under. And same with a lot of other countries. I think Mexicans and the Japanese tend to have the highest egg consumption per capita, but the U.S. is very, very close. I think it's around like 270 eggs per year per American. But all to say that it was this insanely versatile product that everyone was consuming, and it takes over 600 gallons of water to make a dozen eggs, which most people don't realize the resources required to produce eggs. And it's not because chickens drink a bunch of water. It's because the grain that chickens consume is incredibly water intensive. So we felt that this could be a way for us to make a big difference in terms of the way that the world consumes.
So I'm assuming, based on just, I don't do public math, but just off the top of my head, if people consume about an egg a day, the majority of those eggs are probably going into industry, right? Like processed foods, baked goods, et cetera, right? I'm assuming like mayonnaise and all these other products that we have in the supermarket.
Yeah, actually, the majority tends to be in like at the grocery stores, in retail, where consumers buy the shell eggs. But to your point, I think a lot of so the majority goes into that, and then the rest of those, I would say closer to a third or so, go into the ingredient space. But in terms of the shell egg, to your point, I mean, part of it is consumers and also small companies buy all these eggs, and then they use them for whatever. Some people use it to make their scrambles every morning. Some people use it for their for to bake cakes and to do whatever they want to use eggs for, and also small businesses. So in that respect, even though the majority is in the retail space, consumers sort of use them for a bunch of other a bunch of applications beyond a scramble.
So what is the actual product? Because from my understanding, this isn't a B2C company. You don't have physical products in the supermarket. And I don't know if you guys are going to change that at any point, but right now, from my understanding, right? So unlike Just, who have a egg replacement in supermarkets, which I haven't tried yet, what do you guys do? Like, what is the actual product?
Yeah, so the actual product is a liquid and powder, really egg proteins. And so this is where we're a little different than most of our peers in that, or a lot of the companies in the space, is that the technology that we work with is a very deep tech approach, which is we make the exact same proteins that are found in animal products using fermentation. So we make animal proteins without using animals.
Okay.
And the way that the product looks is, if you're a company, we usually sell it in a powder, right? The way that eggs are actually, oftentimes as ingredients are used as a powder, and then added to mixes, et cetera, for use cases. And then some companies use it in the liquid format. So we would offer both of those options. But we tend to sell our proteins in kind of a pure protein powder. So similar to like whey protein or pea protein that consumers would buy in those tubs. And so the egg is one of the many products that we produce. We're really more of to your point, a B2B company, that the way that we position ourselves is more as the enabling infrastructure for all the other alternative protein companies, including all the big food companies that are trying to really catch up, right? That consumer preferences are shifting. And so how do we, as Every, help enable companies like Impossible, right? And like all of these new up and coming companies develop their first gen or second generation products that give you the better bite, right? All these ingredients where eggs are really critical that these companies are not using because they want to be animal free. How do we help expand the toolkit of proteins that these companies have to work with, and especially working with the big companies to help them transition to an animal free future? And part of that is because I fundamentally believe that the world can't wait for these solutions. We can try and build one brand and try and do it all ourselves, but at the end of the day, the magnitude of these problems is so massive that we cannot wait. And for me, I felt that as a B2B sort of infrastructure company, we could make a lot. We could have a massive impact very, very quickly.
So what is the product made from? Because as I was saying earlier, there's the Impossibles and the Beyonds, right? There's the ones that are making it from plants. There's the ones that I know a few companies do, like fermentation. And then there's a few companies that are doing lab grown. So what are you guys doing?
Yeah.
Something completely different.
So we sit in the fermentation category.
Okay.
And what that means is in the same way that brewers use yeast to convert sugar into alcohol, right, to make beer or wine, or that bakers use yeast to convert sugar into alcohol, into carbon dioxide to leaven bread, yeast some other companies use yeast to convert sugar into protein.
Okay.
And so yeast and microorganisms more broadly are little factories, right, that convert carbon into another molecule. And so again, over the millennia, we've been able to harness the potential of yeast to make things like beer and wine, to make bread and protein. And some of but what we do is we work with a strain of yeast that naturally converts sugar, carbon dioxide, sugar into protein. And what we can do is we can actually train or hack the yeast to produce specific kinds of proteins. So we then apply like a deep tech approach to essentially a programming approach to yeast, where yeast become these little computers, right? That instead of reading zeros and ones, they're using 4 letters, right? A, T, C, and G, which is DNA, to make all these different kinds of products, right? To make the alcohol, to make the carbon dioxide for bread, and to also make protein. And so by 3D printing DNA sequences that code for those specific proteins, we can the yeast end up reading that DNA sequence and end up churning out any protein on the planet. And so you can actually get my yeast to make any protein known to man. And that's how actually a lot of drugs are made today, like insulin. Wow. People don't know how ubiquitous this technology is. And so when I tell them this, like, this is crazy. But as crazy as it sounds, it's been around for 40 years. Like, insulin was the first ever animal protein made without using animals. It used to come from pigs. And we needed over 50,000 pig pancreases to make a single kilo of insulin protein. And fast forward to today, it is 99% produced using fermentation. And so we use that same exact technology and apply it to a lot of other animal proteins that we think can make a really big difference in terms of our footprint on the planet.
So did you know all this stuff coming in? Because based on what you said, it doesn't seem like you have a background in this, right? So is this like, all right, we need to do something, like, as far as your perspective at the time, like, all right, I need to do something. I'm realizing this industry is bad. And then you start doing research and how did you come up with this?
Yeah. So number one is, no, I don't have any technical, I didn't have any of this technical background. I mean, I've learned a ton in the last 7 years of building this company, but ultimately, I learned all of this on the spot, as drinking out of a fire hose, like most people do at a startup, right? You usually don't really know what you're getting yourself into, and
you're just putting out fires all the time and learning as you go.
Exactly. But ultimately, for me, the way that I got into this is, coming from a government background, I spent some time at the U.S. Department of Agriculture in the sub-agency of the USDA, responsible for regulating every slaughterhouse in the country.
Okay.
And that's what really opened my eyes to how incredibly massive the animal protein production complex really was. And I became very acutely aware also of the impact that it was having. So I spent some time in Geneva studying sort of global food security because I got really interested in it and I wanted to study. I used an opportunity to get really deep in this space. And I began learning all of these stats that just blew my mind. And I was so angry because I'm like, how did no one teach me this? How did I have to Google, and research this myself to understand that that animal agriculture emits more greenhouse gases than the entire transportation sector than all the cars, planes, ships in the world combined. That it is responsible for a third of the world's freshwater usage, that 3/4 of the land used for agriculture is for animal protein production. And 3 out of every 4 emerging infectious diseases can be traced back to animals. And also, like, the fact that, so many of the diseases of the developed world are actually, like, these are all preventable for the most part, and they're so tied to diet.
Yeah.
That, heart disease and cancers, a lot of cancers are tied to the diet that we are eating. And also the majority of antibiotics produced in the world today are not given to humans. They're fed to animals.
Yeah.
And, it's the number one cause of deforestation on the planet. It's the number one cause of extinction of species on the planet. And so, like, the list just kept going. And I thought, oh my God, like, this is a massive problem. How do we how do we get the world essentially to transition away from this addiction to animal protein that is literally killing us as people, killing the planet, and not to mention the 70 billion animals that are slaughtered every single year to satiate our palate. And that's when I realized this problem is way too big. And if we could solve food, it's as close to a silver bullet as you can get to solving so many, or making a massive dent in so many of the world's biggest problems. And so I became obsessed.
Do you see a problem? Because I was the same about probably 8-9 years ago. I started watching the documentaries and reading the books and listening to lectures and going to events. And same, I was like mind blown by all these different stats. And subsequently, I went vegan, and I was vegan for about 8 years or so. And now I'm like, I would say, flexitarian with a heavy lean on vegan. So probably 80% of my diet is vegan. And then another 20% is, a little bit of eggs, chicken, but not too much. But do you see a problem with the food, or do you see a problem with the industry? So, like, as just as an example, right? If you had backyard hens, right, roaming free, having a good old time, and you just let them live out their life like they would in an animal sanctuary, and you collect the eggs.
Yeah.
Are the eggs inherently bad, or is it just the industry? Same with when I look at. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no. It's a great point, and as much as we want to bifurcate them, they're one and the same. If you think about it, like, the way that they are produced informs the product itself. Like, the foods that we're eating today are, because they're produced via factory farms. It is hard to imagine these products really being genuinely amazing for us, right? And to your point, and you can see the difference and taste the difference when you have, when you raise these animals in different conditions, right now. And the unfortunate part is that the vast majority, over 90% of the meat, milk, and eggs that is consumed, unfortunately, doesn't come from these backyard chickens. They come from the worst forms of production, especially the eggs that are used as ingredients, right? But even the eggs that people buy at grocery stores, for the most part, if they are not like pasture raised, they usually come from factory farms where there are thousands of chickens, and where they will never see the sun, they will never walk on grass. Oftentimes, legally, they're required. They basically have the size of an iPad to live out their lives, in terms of like basically the size of a sheet of paper. And so it's
and that's the good ones. The bad ones are just horrific. Like, they'll be in 4 or 5 squished in a cage. Like, it's absolutely, it's horrific.
Yeah. So so there's that piece, but I think to your point is some of these products. I mean, ultimately, I think we are consuming, and it's not. I think it's historically that the amount of animal products that we consume that we consume as a society in the last 50 years is just so much higher than so much more than we have ever consumed as individuals in the past.
Sure.
Like you see these charts about, like, we like to think that, our grandparents and our great, like, that this is part of the American way, right?
Yeah.
That, or the Mexican way, or whatever way it is, the European way that we eat. We eat meat every single day, and we eat these products in these kinds of quantities, and that's actually a relatively new phenomenon. 50 plus years ago, we weren't consuming in the way that we did. And so part of what I think is important is not only changing, like, it's not that the products are inherently bad per se, right? The processes, I think, is inherently atrocious, and factory farming should not exist in the 21st century.
100%.
But number two is the quantities that we're consuming are actively killing us. Like, the vast majority of Americans consume more than enough protein, but over 97% of Americans are deficient in fiber.
Wow.
And animal products don't have fiber. Those come from plants, and we are not consuming the amount of plants that we need to actually feed our microbiome, right? Our gut bacteria, that to feed our bodies. And I think there is an inherent shift that needs to happen to transition people, towards a more balanced diet, and that the animal proteins that we do consume come ideally from sources, ideally like ours, right? And like other companies that are making these products, that we can guarantee don't have any antibiotics, don't have any hormones, don't have any of this other crap that's added to our food today.
Yeah. Well, to your point that you were talking about overconsumption, there's food scientists over the last, 5, 6, 7 decades have just found ways to hack our the way we view food, the way we consume food. They've made it so addictive. They've added the sugars and the salts and the fats and all the things that we crave, right? On a very, like, basic level. And it's difficult, right? Like, and I think I'm a person that has pretty good self-control. And you walk through the supermarket and you see the stuff and you're like, oh, that looks good. And you see the, all the sugary stuff, all the baked goods you see. And then, for someone who eats meat, they'll see the double, triple burger with all the cheese melted. And, you have ads all day running from all the different Taco Bells and Burger Kings and McDonald's, and they make it look extremely appetizing. It's a constant battle to not overconsume. If you're the average person, it's cheap, it's affordable, it's tasty. There's no, forget all the backstory to it as far as it's, because no one tells you that story, right? You have to go dig for that story. No one tells you, wow, like, no one's giving you an ad telling you how horrific it is, how the meat got to where it is, what are the carbon footprints to it, et cetera, et cetera. Everyone's telling you, look how, like, tasty this is, how cheap this is, how affordable this is, how, it gets all the calorie you need for the day, et cetera, et cetera. So it is hard.
Yeah, you're right. And that's an inherent part of the problem, because no one wants to be, to your point, no one wakes up saying, like, I want to eat a factory farmed egg, right? Or a factory farmed, like, steak. And at the end of the day, the vast majority of consumers make their food choices based on taste and convenience. And that is, to your point, something that companies have exploited, right? And it's like, okay, this is what consumers want. This is what we're going to basically give them, but at what cost? And I think that's where we fundamentally need a paradigm shift. And at the end of the day, it's also like, how do we, we're not going to get there overnight. And so the way that we see building the future of food is, let's help people. let's help people eat a little better. It doesn't have, we're not gonna, overnight transition the world to eating, fruits and vegetables every day. And that is a challenge that I see with, some folks in this space around, why are we using this technology to make eggs, right? To make meat, to make these different kinds of dairy products and cheeses, et cetera. And it's, it's like they're not as healthy as fruits or vegetables. And like, yes, but we have to acknowledge that everyone is starting from a different place. And for some people, like, they're gonna still be eating pizzas, right? They're still going to be eating burgers. They're still going to be eating, the Egg McMuffins. And so how do we make those products a little better for people and slowly, and slowly kind of start this transition and this new wave of consumption, ultimately helping and meeting people exactly where they're at. And that's where I see a huge opportunity, and why I love the approaches of so many of the new generation of companies like us, and like Impossible, right, and like others, where it's like, look, let's meet people exactly where they're at. If they're eating a Whopper, how do we make that Whopper better for the planet, right? Better for their health, better for the animals. And I think same thing with what we're doing is, how do we plug into the existing infrastructure and really help transition it over time.
Yeah. How do you feel? So, I just saw the other day, Impossible or Beyond, I believe it's Beyond. They are coming out nationwide with chicken nuggets in KFC. And I got a KFC across the street from me. I haven't been to KFC in like 2 decades. And I was like, you know what? I might check it out. The thing I dislike, I think, is the fact that they're trying to like brand it as a healthier alternative. I don't think any of these foods are healthy. Chicken nuggets, I don't care if it's plant-based or animal-based, they're not healthy. Same with, the burgers. It's a great alternative. It's much, much better. But to say it's healthy is a little bit of a, kind of like, I don't know.
I completely agree. And I think no one should look at these products as a health food. Let's be clear about that, right? They're not the spirulina, algae, or the kale salad. It is by no means that. And I think to your, the way that I see it is, look, if we're going to eat it, if we're going to still go there, we're still going to eat it. How, again, like at the margins, right? Make a little bit of a better choice. To your point, it's not, you're not choosing between, the KFC chicken and a salad. People are not going to be making that choice quite yet. But if they're choosing between, 2 items on a menu,
for sure.
How and they're craving, to your point, right? There's this, we've been sort of conditioned, right, to crave these kinds of products. How do we make those products a little bit, to your point, a little better? They're not, we're not we're not there yet in terms of getting, transitioning to the kale salad just yet. And so this is one step, I think, in the right direction.
Yeah. And I think for a while, I lived in such a bubble. I lived in New York for a long time.
Yeah.
And New York has everything, right? Like whatever type of food you want. And it's obviously the best chef, the best restaurants open up there. So you have the best vegan food, the best Moroccan food, the best Israeli food, the best, maybe not Mexican, but maybe Mexican too. The best of everything for the most part. So and I drove out here from New York. So I'm currently in Denver, and I actually did it twice this year. And when you drive all along the way, all you see is KFCs and Burger King. All you see is fast food chains, Cracker Barrels, like stuff that I've never even heard of back in New York. So it is. So, we stopped at a few Burger Kings, and they do have the Impossible. And honestly, it tastes exactly the same. So to your point, to have those alternatives is great, because I think a lot of people will choose it. Maybe not the majority, but it's a growing trend. And to have those options all across, because that's all you see. That's all you see is these massive chains everywhere, and it's the same 10 to 20 chains everywhere you go. So to have not in all of them, but at least in some of them, to have alternatives is great.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I do think that once the products are cost competitive, right?
Yeah.
Once it's not a little bit more expensive, but actually the same, if not a penny cheaper, I think the majority of the market will shift, right? Because at the end of the day, at that point, it's like the product tastes just as good and it's just as convenient, right? That those two are what, like, people, are what inform a lot of consumer behavior. If we can tackle those head on and compete head to head, but be able to change all the other factors, right? Like, people are eating the chicken nuggets in spite of the way that they're made, right? And in spite of the environmental impact, and in spite of the factory farming, not because of it, right? They're eating it because they're, to your point, they're delicious and they're affordable and convenient. If the alternatives end up being able to compete on those two fronts, right, the convenience and the taste, and by the way, it has like, for ours, like, has no cholesterol, there are no antibiotics, no hormones, there's zero slaughter required, and it is not killing the planet in the process, then it's like, as a consumer, I'm like, why not, right? There are now all these other reasons, especially because my top two drivers of behavior have been met. And so now the secondary points become more salient. And I think that's where I think that, and that's the future that we want to build, is where these products end up becoming the default and not the alternative.
Would you guys ever do, I mean, I don't know what's in the future plans, but would you ever consider doing B2C products, or are you strictly B2B?
Yeah, we will have some B2C products to help animate some of our proteins and bring them to life for consumers, and help really tell our story of why and what we're doing. So we'll have some B2C products, but for the most part, we always see the big opportunity and the big need really is in the B2B, like Tyson and Nestle and General Mills and all of the biggest food, McDonald's, Burger King, etc. Like, this is where these are the products people are buying today.
Yeah.
Right. These are the companies that have millions of people across the world eating their products today. And so if we can work with some of the biggest food companies in the world, again, we see just where we can really help transition the world to an animal-free future. And so we see the biggest opportunity there, but we will be bringing some products, in some B2C formats. And so what we're actually leaning into is more the B2B to C, which is the Intel Inside approach, where it's not pure kind of this random ingredient, and it's not this, consumer-facing, egg that you'll find, but it is the Intel Inside, where that the products that you're buying, are powered by our proteins. And so we just launched, actually last in November, with Pressed Juicery. They're
nice.
I
used to drink there all the time.
They're very popular in New York.
Yeah.
And we just launched it in New York and LA with them to launch the world's first animal-free animal protein smoothie. And it's a protein smoothie that...
Animal-free animal protein smoothie.
Yeah.
Because smoothies are usually vegan. What do the animal smoothies have? Like milk?
So usually they have whey protein.
Whey
and
protein.
oftentimes smoothies end up being like chocolate or vanilla or strawberry, because you kind of, whether you're using pea protein, right, or soy protein or whey protein, proteins have just such a strong taste. I don't know if you consume any protein powders.
I don't.
Well, I tend to drink them.
I know they're popular though.
You like add a scoop of it, and if you were to have that in water, it would be very hard to, well, for me at least, it's very hard to swallow.
Yeah, they would probably have to be high in sugar for them to taste like anything decent, right?
So typically, that's exactly right. The vast majority of these protein powders end up having to be in chocolate or vanilla or strawberry, or have a bunch of sugar or artificial sweeteners to mask the flavor of the protein. And so that's when you go to a grocery store, you go to a GNC or some of these other places. When you look at the protein options, it's usually these kinds of flavors, right? The chocolate, the vanilla, the strawberry. So it's really hard to make them taste good without having to add a bunch of stuff to hide the flavor of the proteins. And if you put them in a smoothie, then you have to add you have to add a bunch of other ingredients to help hide the flavor, but also the texture. And so what we wanted to do is, there's a protein actually in the egg white that we discovered through our research that has the bioavailability of egg white protein, but it has no eggy smell and no eggy taste, and dissolves really well in drinks. And so you actually don't have to add any chocolate or any vanilla or any strawberry or any sugar or artificial sweeteners to have it taste good. And so again, this is where we can use really great, really like the most advanced technology to make products that, again, meet people where they're at in terms of taste, right? That the taste is absolutely there, and in some ways actually tastes better. So 9 out of 10 times, our protein is preferred over any protein in the market, whether
like
it's
in a blind taste test.
Protein. In a blind taste test, people have no idea that it is, and and one of the things I want to do is go outside in New York or LA or somewhere else, and actually in the middle of the country, and have people taste different products, and asking them which product they prefer, which we've done internally for our own tastings, and it's preferred over any other product, and that's where I see huge potential for us to really make the future of food delicious and sustainable, and that those all don't have to be mutually exclusive. And actually, we can make them healthier, because now this smoothie has no added sugar. It is literally just fruits and vegetables, like pineapple, spinach, avocado, other greens, and our protein, and there's nothing else added to it. And so, when people are actively looking to have protein, how can we deliver that protein in a way that is actually nourishing for the consumer instead?
Dude, you should go to B2C with that. If you have the best tasting protein powder with the least amount of sugar, I think that's something consumers would want. No, other than obviously in their smoothies, but just as a standalone product, I think that would be great.
We are we're definitely thinking about, again, what is the best way to bring these products to market, because there are a lot of companies already that are selling a lot of these products. And so again, how can we have the biggest impact? But to your point, yes, to answer your question, yes, that product will be available for consumers. We're rolling it out more broadly later this year.
You're welcome, everyone. What do you?
So if you're ever in New York, if you ever go back, or you have friends in LA, definitely, I think it's only in market for a couple more days, I think.
It's like a limited
it's
time?
a limited edition. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, we wanted to test it out with press to see, to just learn a ton about how consumers react to the product, do they like it, et cetera. And then we'll likely end up doing a larger rollout.
So you guys recently did a name change to the company, and it was Clara Foods, which I liked because Clara is my mother's name.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. So I was like, oh, that's a good name. And now you're the Every Company. And it seems like there's a lot of companies now, obviously doing name change, right? Facebook, Meta, and I've seen a bunch of others.
Yeah.
What's the reasoning behind it?
I love that your mom's name is Clara. It was my co-founder's dog's name.
Really?
And also it means egg white in Spanish.
Oh, it does. Interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. There you go. You learn something every day.
And also it was like this very innocent, approachable, way that it was like we tipped our hat to the egg and what we were working on. And it was approachable, it was accessible to people. It was I think a nice way to communicate, the science, which ultimately we wanted to get people excited about what we were doing, and comfortable with it. Because we're the fifth oldest company in the space after Impossible, Beyond, Just, and Perfect Day. But we've been
really
head down. Yeah, we're one of the oldest in the space, but we've been very head down on the R&D, like just developing the core technology before launching our products. And so the reason, and so we were very thoughtful about how do we talk about what we're doing. And really over time, what became clear is we shouldn't it's not enough to get people comfortable with this. Like, I want people to be excited about this.
Yeah.
Like, the process is the products are going to be amazing, but it's the process and the technology that makes all of this possible. And so how do we get people on fire about this? And so I thought, look, we need a name that captures that can get people excited. But number two is that really articulates our mission of what we are doing. We're not just here to make a little vegan egg white. Like, we are building a protein platform to transition every company to an animal-free future, and to get sustainable animal-free protein to everyone. I don't want these to be a New York and LA thing.
Yep.
I want these proteins and our products to be accessible to every person in the world, not just Middle America, but in Mexico, in South Africa, in Morocco, in China. I want these products to be accessible to everyone on the planet, to have access to high quality, antibiotic-free, hormone-free, truly sustainable animal protein. And that's that to everyone everywhere. And we wanted something that can really speak to that, because that's been the reason why we've been so head down on our technology, is because I wanted to prove that we could make our products accessible to the masses, before we really, before we scaled production, and really just did a ton of launches. And that's why we partnered actually with AB InBev, the world's largest fermentation company, to help enable that. So they own Corona, Bud Light, etc. And they're the largest fermentation company in the world. They use yeast to convert sugar into alcohol to make beer and wine. To make beer, we use yeast to convert sugar into protein. And so we use similar fermentation infrastructure. And what better way, what better company to partner than a company that has a global footprint to allow us to make our products accessible as quickly as possible. And so it just made sense for us to evolve the company to more of the infrastructure and enabler, now that we have the partnerships and the products that can tell that story for us.
It's so crazy that you say you're one of the oldest companies in the space. I only heard about you guys maybe 2 years ago, I think, something like that. And the media has this way of making everything an overnight success, right? Because you hear about, and they don't tell the story of 6, 7, 8 years of hard work, R&D, sleepless nights, all the other stuff that most entrepreneurs have to go through. And sure, there are some entrepreneurs that are definitely quote unquote overnight success, which it's not overnight. It usually takes maybe a couple of years of best case scenario. But how do you start something where there's no clear infrastructure, no clear guidelines as to how to start this? Because it's, like you said, relatively new. Not a lot of companies doing this, or maybe none specifically what you're doing.
Yeah.
How do you take on such a monumental task as to build this thing? Because you guys raised a lot of money, right? I think I read around 230 million overall, not like in series over the years. So how do you go about it?
Yeah. We've been very lucky that the vision for the future we're creating is really resonating with investors and our customers and people more broadly. And you're right. It's a slog. Like it is not easy. And I think for us, especially, like when I founded the company, people had no idea that alternative proteins would be a thing.
Yeah.
Right. It was just something that I felt it needed to exist. This is something that the world needs. It's not like agnostic of whether the world wants it. I just believe that it needs it, that we need to do this. And if not, it was one of those questions like, if not now, when? If not me, who? Because I didn't really see a lot of other folks doing it. And I thought, look, if I'm going to at least give it a shot. And I think part of it was that like in some ways, like the humility to say, I don't know if I'm going to succeed, but I'm going to at least give it a shot.
Yeah.
I don't have all the answers, and I'm not going to try and pretend that I do. I am a first-time founder. I have a big dream and a big vision of what I want, or what I think the world needs to look like. And I'm willing to roll up my sleeves and do whatever I can to make that happen. And I know I'm going to mess up, and I'm going to make a ton of mistakes. And I know that there is, I know that I'm going to, that there's going to be a ton of learnings along the way. And that's okay. That's part of running a startup, and that's part of running a company. And I used to be very hard on myself, like beating myself for not having 20 years in industry, doing this for not, for some, like not having all the answers, because in some ways we're building the plane as we're flying it. Like, because that's kind of what a startup is. It's like we're all learning on the spot. And so what I found it very important to hire people who had kind of been there and done a lot of that stuff. And my job was more of bringing those pieces together. And it's been a hell of a journey. And I'm so grateful that I made that choice, because I was actually going to end up working in DC for the Obama administration. And I was about to take a job, and I called my, and I had studied government at Harvard, right? I was like, studied global food security in Geneva. And I had done all these internships at the White House and at the USDA. Like I was really, with my congressman in Texas, I had kind of lined up all the Legos, like everything. Yeah. And I was 22 at the time, but I was like, oh my God, I've since I was 17, I was knee deep in trying to make a career out of government, because that's where I thought my life was going to head. And I ultimately got a job in the Obama administration. And I was like, I'm going, this is like exactly like my 5-year plan, right? My 10, on track for my 10-year plan. And I called one of an amazing mentor of mine from a previous, from my previous summer from an internship. I was like, I kind of been telling him a lot about how I just fell in love, wanted to fix our food system.
Yeah.
And I called him. I was like, I got this amazing job offer. Like, I think I'm going to take it. And I was so excited about it. And he was like, what are you doing? Like, you should be in San Francisco building this future of food. That's what you've been talking to me about. That's like, whenever you talk about it, your eyes light up.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, how the hell am I going to do it? I have no background. I have no experience. Like I don't know what skills I can contribute to this space. And it was scary. Like, I'd never thought I was going to be an entrepreneur. I'd never in my mind, like, it just seemed really hard. I was like, I don't, this is something that like, I don't know if I'm really built for this. And so I had all these reasons why I shouldn't do it. But ultimately, when he told me that, I like took a step back and I was like, you're right. Like, what am I doing? And I just it was so seductive to follow right that path that I had seen myself follow for the last, and I had been following, right? That I was actively on that path the last 5 years, that it was very hard to pull myself out of that. But I said, you know what? Let me give myself 6 months. Worst case scenario is I fail everything, I crash and burn, and then I, beg for another job in administration or something. But even then, there likely may be another opening, like or in government in some shape or form. Like I could, like that would likely still be there. If not, like I can make something happen. I actually at that point felt lucky that I could get another job. I felt confident enough that I could get something else in the meantime. But I was like, let me give myself 6 months. And that made all the difference in terms of assessing, like, I felt like I was signing my life away from government because I was going to take this step, realizing in retrospect that it's actually not, 6 months is not that much time. It's not a huge deal. And I was like, look, let me give myself that time. And so when I had that call the next day, I booked a one-way ticket to San Francisco. Oh, and wow. I had no job. I had no place to stay. I was like, you know what? Let me just give myself some time, because I will always wonder, what if I hadn't made that transition? Like, what if I hadn't taken that flight to San Francisco, and that would have killed me? And I would have always been wondering whether it was DC or New York or wherever I was working. I would always be wondering, what if I had actually followed my dreams? What if I had followed that gut instinct? And now I'm so glad that I did. I didn't appreciate it at the time, but it's one of those things that now I'm realizing whenever I have a gut instinct, like a gut feeling, I need to follow it, because life is too short for me to be wondering, what if I had done it? And at least at that point, if I do it, I can own the consequence. I can say, well, look, okay, I messed up. It was a mistake, but at least I trusted myself and followed my gut. And oftentimes when I look back, the times where I followed my gut were like, those have been the best like experiences of my life.
You made the best decision ever. The politics, government is toxic. Nothing good ever comes from them. And you went into the private sector and you built a great company and you're doing good. That was nothing beats the idealism and naivete in a way of a 20-year-old that wants to like change the world. It's like, it's the best. I don't know. It's the best time in your 20s. You're just so brazen. You're full of, the world hasn't like gotten you down yet. You're like, I can take on everybody. I can do whatever I want. and more often than not, you can. It's a great time. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that you say that, because one, it did not feel that way. Like,
in hindsight though, probably
in hindsight, you're right. Like because I reflect, it's so like life kind of beats you down over time. At least for me, like I now realize if I had stayed in government, I mean, especially like this was in 2012, like this was the Obama's second term, like things weren't amazing, but they were trending, and they
were better than now.
They were much better than now in terms of being able to have an impact. And I'm so, in some ways, in retrospect, I'm like, man, like this was, to your point, totally the right call, even though it did not feel that way. Yeah. And you're right, there was part of me that I think if I had stayed in government, I would have been so jaded, and like part of my soul would have been chipped away, to your point, that I don't think I would have had that brazen idea. I mean, I would have become very cynical. right?
Yep.
To your point, after spending time, and not just in government, but or whatever other career I would have, or whatever other job I would have chosen, it's more that I've been cynical about the ability to change the world or make a positive difference, or like following my dreams, because I had basically shut them up, right?
Yeah.
To do these, to do the more practical thing, and I think having followed my intuition and having it worked out in the way that that it has, and part of it was, it's been a hugely painful journey in many ways. Like there are times where I don't sleep because I'm so invested in what we're doing. And yet I read a book recently, Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic, and she quoted someone who said, like, in terms of what you choose, like what shit sandwich are you willing to eat? Because everything you do is going to have like huge lows. Which lows are you willing to tolerate? And I thought I'd rather, it's not that by choosing the life of in government, it was going to be all, safe and great, and okay. It wasn't going to be terrible, and it wasn't going to be amazing because I wasn't following my intuition. But what basically her point was, in anything you choose, there's going to be very low lows, and it's gonna be crap. What crap are you willing to tolerate? And I realized I'd rather face that crap doing something that I believe in my core needs to happen, because I will be able to stomach it more, knowing that, in retrospect, knowing that I'm doing something that speaks to my soul in a way that nothing else ever has.
For sure. I mean, if you think about it, like so many people working a 9 to 5, and I'm not shitting on that. 9 to 5s are completely fine and they're great. But you have a boss and he's shitting on you and is giving you a hard time. You're like, God damn it. Like, what do I need this type of stuff for? I'm only making X amount each year. But if you have an end goal, if you have a passion, and you're like, okay, I'm willing to suffer for this, right? Kind of like how artists or a musician, maybe, or athletes, they're willing to suffer for their craft because they know at the end of the day, the end goal is to be better. The end goal is to be a champion. The end goal is to create the best music, right? So there's an end goal in mind. And as long as you keep that in mind, and the same with entrepreneurs, right? Like sometimes it's overused, changing the world. Everyone wants to change the world. Yeah. But it does, there is an effect of changing the world, at least, even if it's locally, even if it's on the bigger level, it doesn't matter. But as long as the end goal is something you're willing to suffer for, you're going to do it. So, but I wonder, like, because most entrepreneurs, they're very forward momentum, always trying to propel themselves and the company obviously forward. Yeah. And they don't often maybe stop and reflect. And I'm wondering if you ever do, because you've built something pretty impressive over the past 7 or 8 years. Do you sometimes take a second, give yourself, a moment to breathe and self-reflect and say, like, wow, yeah, I built this. This is pretty impressive. I did this, because sometimes you get lost in the moment, just build, and you don't have a second to pause.
Yeah. I love that you share that. And honestly, I don't do enough of it. Like
you should.
Thank you. One thing that, and that actually was something that I've been working on with in therapy, and like feedback that I've gotten with the team. Like I tended to be one of those CEOs or founders that it's like, even if we were accomplishing a ton, and we wouldn't like, even if the team like killed themselves, like achieving something, I'm like, okay, great. Like this, yes, we did this, but we have these other 4 things that we haven't done yet. And so let's, great. Like, let's move on to these, or like whenever we accomplish something, it would always feel half-hearted because we wanted to get 10 things done. And yes, we got 2 really big things done, but there were these 8 that weren't quite there yet. And so my mind was always fixated on those.
Yeah.
And one time, an intern at the company, someone very, 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 very young at the company kind of reached he's super outspoken, and I love that about him. Now he's a full-time employee, and he was like, "Look, we don't celebrate wins. Like we worked our asses off for this." And I realized, especially as a founder, that the way that I show up and like what I choose to focus on has a massive impact in terms of the morale of the company, and they all, they deserve to be acknowledged for the incredible work that they've done. And so that was like a catalyst for me to start transitioning to a culture of celebration, as opposed to like a culture of like deficiency of like, these are the things that we need to do. And that they're not mutually exclusive, right? And that by celebrating the wins allows us to kind of sit with that, allows me at least to sit with those wins that then give me the confidence to say, all right, we can totally take these other things on. And that's something that in my own personal life I've seen. And I think one thing I've loved about being a founder is it's something so powerful that the company really feels like an extension of me. Mm-hmm. That if we don't celebrate wins, it's because I don't do that in my personal life. Yeah. Right. Like it's a mirror to me. Yeah. The people that I've hired are a reflection of who I am and who I was, right? And who I am becoming. It's like the people that I'm hiring now are different from those that I hired in the beginning, where I felt inadequate because I didn't have, I didn't have, these 20 years of experience. So I would hire, all of these veterans from industry, realizing that we, that we were losing some of that fire of like pushing, and being, I think one thing that I love about being not from industry is you can question convention and say, well, why are we doing these things? Yeah. And there's almost like this ignorance that really is actually a very powerful tool to question like assumptions that like there are companies that have like this technology that I mentioned has been used for 40 years. No one ever thought about using it for this. It wasn't until outsiders came in, my co-founder and myself, to say, we can repurpose this technology and apply it to this whole new world. So anyway, all to say that it's I've learned a lot, and one of the things that I want to cultivate further is this sense of gratitude, right? Of like acknowledgement, and also moving away from a mentality of not being that succeeding and achieving doesn't come from a place of deficiency or not feeling like I'm enough. Yeah. Or that we've achieved enough, and instead coming from a place of abundance that yes, like we're crushing it, and sitting with that, and that gives us all the more reason to continue crushing it and continue achieving. And so we're still achieving under both circumstances, but one comes from a much better place for me than the other, which is where it used to come from, of like, oh, we always need, we're in this rat race and we need to achieve, and never feeling like I'm enough. And instead, like, hey, I am, what we've achieved is enough, and there's room to grow, and that duality can coexist.
Yeah, and that's so important. I'm great at giving it advice, but not following my own advice, because yes, I'm kind of the same. Like I've been, entrepreneur past 6-7 years or so, and most of it solo entrepreneur. And I have full lists of things I need to accomplish, daily activities, daily duties, monthly, annually. And when I hit those goals, I just check them. And okay, and then I don't give myself a second to be like, oh wow, good job. I'm just on to the next. And sometimes my wife will be like, oh, good job, and I'm like, yeah, but I want to hit the next one already. Like I don't give myself even a second to just sit in it and be like, all right, that was just a small pat on the back.
Yeah, I was the same exact way. And part of that is because I carried a mental model. I don't know if this was you as well, but for me, I now know why I did that, which was I felt that if I were to sit, to acknowledge myself and celebrate myself, that would engender complacency. That I would be resting on my laurels, and that I wouldn't want to achieve, and I wouldn't want to push more. And so by not reveling in those wins, I was going to, and those achievements that was going to drive more and more success, because nothing's never enough. And so I'm going to keep achieving. And I felt that if I actually sat down and sat with those wins, that I wasn't going to, I would say, okay, it's all, it's all good.
Yeah.
And I don't have to achieve all, because I'm really happy with where I'm at. And that was a fear that I had, that if I sat with those wins, I wasn't going to, I was going to lose my drive to continue achieving. And that's something that I have been working on in therapy, where my coach was like, try it, see what it's like to celebrate those, and see if you lose that fire. Because she was, one of the things that she said is like, that fire will likely, like, that's very much a deep part of who you are. By acknowledging your wins, I don't think it's going to that you're going to lose that you're all of a sudden going to wake up one day with no desire to change the world, with no desire to achieve. But and I did, and I realized I want to achieve even more, and I'm achieving even more because it's coming from a better, from a actually really good place.
Yeah, no, it's wow. You touch on so many interesting things here. For me, it's partially that. I think it's partially coming from a culture of people. So originally I'm from Israel, and it's not a place, unlike the US, not a place that celebrates wins as much. And they also don't like to hear as much. Like, you're not going to be sitting in the room and everyone's just going to be praising you. Like, if you did something, like, you'll get a small pat on the back. Okay, on to the next. Come on. Like, there's not that culture of let's relish in this win. Let's talk about it. Like, it doesn't exist as much. Where here, it's much more prevalent. Yeah. And so it's partially that, and it's partially, I think, I have, and maybe you're the same, like, there's small goals, medium goals, big goals. And I feel like I've accomplished a lot of the small and medium ones, and I have a few big goals that I have not been able to achieve. And for me, psychologically, the wins in the small to medium goals, the not lost, but the ones that I have not attained in the big goals almost discredit those psychologically. I'm like, okay, I've done the small to medium, but I haven't achieved the big ones yet. So it almost discredits all the other stuff that I've done. And that's why partially the culture, and partially that's why I think I'm not able to, like, fully embrace the wins.
What are the big ones?
Ooh. Well, there's a couple of things I'm not going to get into on the podcast. Okay. One is there's a company I want to build, and I would say right now, outside of all the small to medium stuff that I'm doing, that's the big one that I'm trying to focus on in 2022. Yeah. So hopefully that goes as planned.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds good. And I love what you shared, because I think the cultural piece has a huge element to it, right? And how we grew up shapes so much of how we see the world, right? Yeah. I was listening to a TED Talk of, like, how language shapes reality, how, like, Eskimo, certain Eskimo groups, I don't remember clearly, but they had 12 different words for snow, right?
Yeah, I heard that one.
And there's, or like Russians, have I don't know, X 8 or so different shades of blue. And so their eyes are actually trained to see, the nuances in all these blues that some of us, it's like, oh, that's dark blue and that's light blue. Right. Yeah. But, and so it's interesting, how again, like language creates this reality, and then so much of it is also the cultural background. And I'm Mexican, where if you where it's all also like very much like you have to be almost like humility is humility at your expense, so that when someone compliments you, you never acknowledge it. You kind of like, you kind of say, oh, no, like I don't deserve this. And
you almost put yourself down as you get the acknowledgement of something
good. Exactly. And again, it was one of those, moments for me to self-reflect, like, is this serving me? And there are so many things about my culture and that's why I'm glad that I grew up in Mexico, and I'm glad that I grew up in Texas, because I know what kinds of products we have to make to win people in these parts of the world who love, where animal protein is a huge, huge part of that culture. Where again, for me, fruits and vegetables are not going to be enough to change, to have my mom, transition to a kind of an animal-free diet. And so I'm very grateful for those experiences. And also I'm realizing like there are things that I grew up with, like this, like machismo, for example, that was very prevalent in my community. Like that doesn't serve me. And realizing, well, does this, like putting myself down when I achieve, is this serving me? Like it's no longer enough for me to say, well, I grew up like this, and so this is kind of the way that I am, which before I kind of used to have that mentality of, it is the way that it is for so many, for other things. Now I'm like, what, this isn't, like I have the ability to choose who I want to be and what I want to double down on, and what I wanted to let go of. And that was a kind of a big realization for me.
You mentioned Mexico. I guess the question would be, how open are they to alternative foods? Maybe not even like necessarily alternative meats, but just openness to veganism and stuff like that. And also, and this is, I'm assuming, I don't know what the stats are. I'm assuming the U.S. is a world leader when it comes to alternative protein. Mm-hmm. What are some other countries that are kind of maybe trailblazing or making headway in this space?
I mean, I think the U.S. and Israel. I think is just crushing it. I think there's also like a culture around. I think it's the most vegan country in the world.
Per capita, I think something like that.
Yeah, per capita basis. I think it's a lot more common here and in Israel. But I mean, ultimately, I don't know if people. I think if people are saying, well, I want an alternative protein, we're kind of losing the battle. Like people are not actively waking up, even in the US, to say, oh, I want this other product. It is more, this different technology. I think a lot of it is, hey, I think most people, whether you're in Mexico or in the US, at least if you have enough money to eat, right? And that now like second order needs come on, or preferences, right, start kind of laddering up. So saying, well, now that I have enough money to eat, how can I eat well, right? So I can eat enough, like the quantity of food is already met. How can I, and then start improving the quality of the food? And I think most people want to eat healthier. Most people want to eat and still want to eat good food that is convenient. And so if we can appeal to those, right? Like, because I think if the world is eating our products because they're sustainable, that is a very small percentage. We're not going to transition the world to a different food system, because most people do not make their purchasing based off of sustainability, based off of the animal welfare. And so we have to, if my mom wants to, again, she wants to go to the grocery store and buy, oftentimes she's looking at the bread and finds the one that she knows it's the brand that she's been, She's been buying for the last 20 years, like the same angel food cake that we get every Christmas. That's the one that she's going to get because she knows it tastes good and it's a reliable brand. Or number two, that it's, she'll compare prices and find the one that's cheaper, try it out. And if it tastes good, she'll start buying that one, right? Because it addresses the convenience and the taste element. And so where I see the world transitioning is, again, if we can compete on those two fronts, like at Starbucks, if they're no longer charging extra for the oat milk, right? If that becomes, then I think a much larger part of the population will be adopting that, because again, if it tastes just as good and it tastes and it costs the same and it's just as convenient, then why not? And so all to say that I think less so. I think a lot of the upper classes of a lot of these countries are looking for alternatives, and I think are open to those, some more than others. But that's like the top of the pyramid. And where I think that we need to make a massive inroads is the rest of the pyramid, the base and the middle, which is where we need the most innovation, and that's again what we're trying to tackle. I don't want to convince people to eat our product because we have amazing branding and because we have we'll do that initially before we scale production. But at the end of the day, I want them to choose it because it's either a penny cheaper or absolutely delicious.
Yeah. On top of the Starbucks charge, I want to petition to abolish the guac charge that is prevalent everywhere. I don't know. I have to pay another $2.50 for some extra guac on my food. Just give me guac. I want guac.
If you go to Chipotle and order the grilled veggies, like the veggies instead of meat, or the quote unquote like the protein, the guac is free.
It is?
Yeah.
Oh, there you go, guys. You got a hack right there. I didn't know that. All right. Before we finish up real quick, I want to ask a question about alternative meats.
Yeah.
Meaning, sorry, not alternative, lab-grown meat. Mm-hmm. What's your thought on lab-grown? Because I know it's a little controversial based on who you ask. Like there's the people that come at it from the ethical standpoint. Some people come at it from, mass industry, tech, all these different ways. How do you see it?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of and believer that the future of food is going to, number one is we need every technology on the table. Let consumers decide. I'm not going to say, oh, this one's going to win, this one's going to lose. Or I like this one and I don't like this one. I have preferences in terms of what I would eat, but I'm by no means the average consumer.
Would you eat it?
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, I grew up eating meat. I didn't stop, eating meat, and I didn't stop going to barbecue. I didn't stop eating barbecues in Texas because I stopped liking the taste. I still like it, but it was no longer aligned with with my values. I didn't want to contribute and be complicit to a system that is based on destruction and killing of beings and of the planet. And so I thought, you know what, as much as it pains me to do, I don't want to contribute to this system. If I can have my cake and eat it too, that is, which I think is what this opportunity provides, is I'm not going to be, again, I want to just eat less meat overall. But every once in a while, if I'm craving this, the carne asada that my dad used to make when we were little, then I want to be able to have it without feeling guilty. And so so that's one. And then two, more broadly, is I'm a believer that if we are going to have a fighting chance at having the world not kill everything that's on it, which is what we're on track to do, we need every single solution on the table if we're going to have a fighting chance. And I think cultivated meat, cell-based meat, has a lot of promise in that respect. I mean, the kind of water, energy, and land usage comparison is just astronomical because of how destructive the existing incumbent industry is. Like, I wish that our technologies weren't necessary, but they are. If we want to avert this climate catastrophe, we need every solution on the table. So I'm a huge fan of any and every kind of technology.
Yeah, because sometimes I'll hear purists say, "Oh no, it's meat," and I'm like,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, look, it might not be for you, right? There's people who like to eat raw food. There's people who like to eat this type of diet, that type of diet. Let the market decide, like you said, whatever they want. If that's not for you, don't eat it.
Yeah.
But you cannot deny that it is a 1,000 times better solution and better alternative than what the current market offers.
Exactly. And that is one thing I'm so grateful for coming from politics, that, like when Obama was running for the second term, and people would tell, what ask like Biden, well, he didn't fulfill on this promise and that promise and this promise. It's like, but he did achieve X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
What Biden would say is, don't compare him to the almighty, compare him to the alternative.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, yes, compared to fruits and vegetables, again, all of these other products are not these health foods. Yes, like that is the ideal. However, let's be pragmatic about this. Like if those foods already exist today and people are not eating them. So there is, again, to your point, we've been conditioned to want, these foods, right, that are very tasty and very convenient. And so that's what the majority of the market is. I think it's naive to think that we can somehow, what we haven't been able to do in the last 40 years to transition the world to eating fruits and vegetables, is going to happen. Is now magically going to happen tomorrow. So I think those people, having had their chance, and we should still be fighting for that and pushing for that, because that is a very healthy way of eating, and acknowledging that, again, we need every solution on the table, and let's be pragmatic about this. Like, to your point, even if it's not for you, there's going to be a market for that. People were a heterogeneous, there's a lot of heterogeneity in terms of consumer preferences. And that's why there's a million brands, there's 50 kinds of like milks, from like whole milk to
everything can be milk now. Every nut, everything.
And they're on the grocery store because people are buying them. If people weren't buying almond milk because now they're choosing oat milk, then there wouldn't be almond milk, but there still is, because certain people prefer that product, right? And the palate is very unique, and the consumer palate is very unique. And so I see the future of food. You go to a grocery store looking like you have, now what you see in the milk section, where you see all these kinds of products, you'll see that across, and then have consumers decide which ones they want to eat.
Is milk dead, essentially? Like, because you can argue about all the other things, right? Like, you can say meat, obviously people are still eating it, but the alternatives are creeping up in the market. Same with potentially eggs. But milk, I barely know anyone that drinks milk anymore. I'll be honest.
So this is also where my government hat comes in, which is the unfortunate part, is that there is a subsidy regime in the US. And in other countries, right? These are incumbent industries that are heavily subsidized. Like, the government buys so much of these dairy products that props up this industry. And so it's not even a level playing field. And to your point, in spite of that, these alternatives are making inroads. But I think until big government, right? And so, what we conservatives complain so much about big government, and yet, these are, the government is actively interfering in the markets to skew
with
the
subsidies.
With subsidies. Like, there's just a bunch of articles, like the government. It's like these are remnants of of World War II, where or one of those of a war where the government was buying up dairy from farmers, and they still continue to do that. And there's like cheese in like basements in like government warehouses, because the government has been buying so many of these products. And so I think we just, we need to like level the playing field. And I think ultimately at that point, I think it's a fair question what you're raising, which is, does milk stand a chance when it's not being propped up? And I think that's the question.
Yeah, because milk, I know, I mean, personally, I'm lactose intolerant, so I haven't had milk in 25 years or so. But I know a lot, funnily enough, I used to think I was, some sort of a genetic anomaly or freak, like, oh, I can't drink milk, and then, as I grew old, I was like, the majority of the world actually can't really digest milk in a healthy way. And I think the more science came out, the more people like, I think 50 or 60% of Asia is like lactose intolerant. So like a good portion of the world, actually lactose is horrific for them just on the health level. So
I mean, we're the only animal, right, who drinks a species of another animal, number one.
Yeah, that's so weird.
Two, it's like we're the only one that drinks it past infancy. And so our bodies, are again, talk about like the, what our bodies are meant to be doing. Like that is not something that we're likely adapting to it because we're consuming so much, but past infancy, we're not supposed to be drinking dairy.
Yeah.
Like that's just not part of the intended diet.
Yeah. So, all right, before we wrap up, what for, listeners that maybe want to take a few steps in the right direction and want to reduce their carbon footprint and maybe change their diet a little bit, what are some baby steps that you would offer people?
And I'm so glad you asked that question, because people, the beauty of today is that we can vote with our dollars. Like we can vote at the grocery store. Like we make a choice. We make critical climate decisions without even knowing, right? More, 3 times a day for the most people, sometimes even more if you're snacking. Like there are so many opportunities to actually make a difference and transitioning. And it's not even about, going vegan or going, fully plant-based, but just the small, to your point, the baby steps, right? If you're gonna eat a burger, go get the Impossible Whopper, right? Yeah. Go to a grocery store, and now the products are pretty competitive. Some sell at a premium, and that's partly because this industry is still so new. But if you have that extra dollar, right? But some of these products are actually very, very affordable and delicious. To support this industry, that buy those burgers, buy if you're all in New York or LA, buy the smoothie. Like these data points are really helpful because they help prove out that people want these products, that there is a market for them, and that you encourage your friends to try them out. Like I love going to a potluck and like bringing in like a vegan mac and cheese, and people have no idea that it's I mean, now they know, because they know that I'm very vegan, and I now it's been like 10 years. Yeah. But I think now, if people don't know who brings it, it's really cool to show that these products actually taste good, number one. And two, that they're found in almost any grocery store. So I would actively just encourage people to talk about these, and whenever they can, to buy these alternatives. Right now, you can go to Starbucks or to Peet's Coffee in San Francisco, or Peet's Coffee all over the country for some of these products. Like they're everywhere. Yeah. And so that's what I would. I think that would be, I think, a huge piece. It's a huge validator for the industry.
And if I could offer my small input, try intermittent fasting, because I've been doing it for a long time, and then I end up only eating 2 meals a day, so lunch and dinner, and therefore I don't have breakfast, and you just feel lighter, you feel more energetic. I mean, it's not for everyone, but for me, it's worked out, and it's worth a shot. And again, it's one way to eat one less meal a day and doing your part just a little bit.
Yeah. I love that.
Arturo, man, thank you so much. This was a blast.
Yeah, Roy, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. And if you're ever in San Francisco, drop me a line. Would love to host you guys. at our labs, have you see how we make our protein.
Oh, for sure. That's definitely going to happen this year. I have some friends out in San Francisco, so I'm going to be flying out for sure. Where can people find you and learn more about what you guys do?
Yeah, well, I think the easiest platform to reach me is on LinkedIn. Okay. It's Arturo Elizondo, and I'm under the Every Company. We're there. And then also theeverycompany.com is our website. They can reach out. If you're interested in our products, follow us on social media. But yeah, please feel free to reach out to me directly or via the company. And happy to support anyone on this journey, because the world needs everyone. And we're actively hiring a lot of people across business, ops, finance, as well as molecular biology and chemical engineering. So if you want to be part of this mission, there are so many companies doing amazing, amazing work, and we could all use talented, hungry, passionate people.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for your time today. I had a blast. Maybe we'll do it again in the future, but for now, I really appreciate your time today, man. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a total pleasure and thrill to be a part of it. Thanks for having me.
Take care, man.